Hello, everybody. This is Joseph Farrell. It's News and Views from the NEFARIUM Part 2, April 1st, 2010. And the reason I'm doing Part 2 is because my Part 1, I actually did record a video that was about 15 minutes long, almost 15 minutes long, and I was informed that I was cut off. So I didn't even know that until someone said that I had quit talking, and so I had to go back and look on YouTube, and sure enough, the video cut out right as I was talking about Babylon's banksters, China, and the revolution in China in the early 20th century with Sun Yat-sen, all of that falling out of Western imperialism and the introduction of the drug trade and opium into China. So yeah, the Chinese have a long, basically my point was the Chinese have a long memory of dealing with the corporate interests that lay behind the British Empire and then, of course, the rest of the Western world. So it doesn't surprise me in that sense that Babylon's Banksters is being bought in that country. It may signal perhaps a little bit of an impending culture war. But anyway, the other thing that I talked about, I mentioned at the beginning of that first part of the talk, is this idea that I'm having that we're seeing a kind of theater of the apocalypse. And it actually was brought on. I've been thinking a lot about that. I'll be blogging about this idea in the coming week. Um, It was brought about by my reading a book by a colleague of mine in the alternative community. He's probably a well-known name to most of you, Nick Redfern. And Nick, I really like Nick's books because while he does tend to focus a bit on UFOs, he branches out. He has a very wide context. He casts a very big net over various phenomena, and he has his own personal views about these things, but he's one of those writers that is able to keep his personal views out of the picture and report very directly what he's researching. And the other reason I like Nick is that he, in his research, relies a lot on whistleblower testimony, and he views his role very much like a classical investigative journalist would have viewed their role back, 40 or 50 years ago, is simply to put the information out there and let the reader decide whether it's valid, whether to trust parts of it or not. So I really like Nick's work. The book that I've been reading, I just finished it last night, is a book that he wrote called Final Events. And it's about a secret government UFO study group that, according to the whistleblower testimony that he presents in the book, concluded that UFOs really represent some, not so much extraterrestrials, but ultra-terrestrials. In other words, they represent some sort of interdimensional being, and that they are in fact not benevolent, and that they are in fact best viewed in terms of classical Judeo-Christian demonology. In other words, they're demons, all right? And of course, that view's been around for a long time in religious circles. What intrigues me about Redfern's book, and I'm going to be trying to address this idea because I think he's to be credited for noticing something very, very significant and very important. And that is a kind of a covert, or at least not well publicized, alliance between the standard American civil religion, which is this kind of evangelical fundamentalism on steroids, that takes the view that there's going to be this tribulation period and kind of a two-stage second coming of Christ, the rapture, and then Christ's return to earth, and so on and so forth. Now, mind you, I do not and have never subscribed to that view. even in the days that I was affiliated formally with Eastern Orthodoxy, that view would have been understood by any church with some sort of historical connection, be it Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, Anglicanism, what have you. That view would have been understood as a heresy. And in fact, that view that there's this two-stage second coming of Christ, and you have these periods that are measurable in terms of a number of years, like the tribulation, that view of interpretation really only arises around the mid-19th century, and in very deliberate circumstances that, to my mind, speak very carefully or suggest very deliberately that the view itself was engineered and began to be put out publicly as kind of a conditioning of the public. So now people in America particularly think that this is what Christianity has always taught, and it is not. It has become more or less what people associate with apocalyptic expectation in Christian doctrine. All right. Now, I mention all of this because in Redfern, he takes that view and shows that that view has become more or less the de facto accepted view of end time events by a certain group of Christian officers and highly ranking military and government personnel, both in the Pentagon and in various presidential administrations. And that's what's disturbing, is this alliance between the Pentagon, the military-industrial complex, and this understanding of religion. It's very, very frightening. And I think if you stop and do the numbers, if you do the math, so to speak, what that portends is a very, very powerful alliance that would be able to manipulate or socially engineer events in a way that may make it look like certain expectations are being fulfilled. And also, it would be a way for them, if they ever decided to clamp down on this country, it would be a way for them to justify, in the name of God, what they do in this country. And that's also very, very dangerous. We've been down that road before. You have only to read the speeches of Adolf Hitler and how many times he referenced God as a justification for the policies that he was putting into place in Nazi Germany. So I have to credit Mr. Redfern, and if you're not familiar with that book, Final Events, it's an interesting book, but there are parts of it that will really stop and make you think. And I hope that, time permitting, I'm going to be able to do some white papers in the members only area on this subject, because I find this whole idea of that kind of an alliance and all of the implications that spill out from it very, very disturbing. Anyway, that's kind of take two of what I had been talking about in the original fireside chat that for some reason YouTube didn't upload properly. So anyway, I will see everybody on the flip side. This is Joseph Farrell with the news and views from the NEFARIUM for April 1st, 2012. Bye-bye, everybody.